I'm not afraid to admit that I've definitely made a fair few videos talking about new drafts that I've made, but I think it's only the nature of FPL players to make a whole load of drafts before the season begins. But I think I'm pretty much there now. So it's safe to say this is my team selection for Game Week 1. All right, I'm going to go through a number of statistics and data that you might have seen already on this channel. First up, I've got the clean sheet odds. So what I want to do is talk about the clean sheet odds and some other statistics before I pick my defenders. I think ultimately the best sort of prediction metrics you can look at for defenders is both clean sheet odds and defenders' likelihoods of getting attacking returns, because ultimately that's really where you score your points from your defenders, right? So here we've got stats from 11ify. There'll be a link to 11ify in the description so you can see this for yourself. But these are the teams, all of the teams in the league ranked for clean sheet potential for the first 6 game weeks. You can see the top 5 there: Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool, Aston Villa and Crystal Palace. The one thing I'm going to really lean on in this video, and I've said it in my previous drafts, is goalkeeper choice. So the reason I'm using this for goalkeeper choice is I want to pick a 4.5 million goalkeeper in this game. And looking at the first 6 fixtures and the clean sheet odds of 4.5 million goalkeepers, the number 1 is Dean Henderson of Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace expected to get 1.55 clean sheets from the first 6 fixtures. Next team is Nottingham Forest by the looks of it, 1.41. All the rest of the goalkeepers around, apart from Chelsea, but can you really predict who's actually going to start as the Chelsea keeper? All the rest of those goalkeepers around are a little bit more expensive. So looking at the clean sheet odds, at least, it's pointing towards Dean Henderson in goal. Next thing to look at is projected goal involvement for defenders. So projected goal involvement odds. This is taken from an account on Twitter at RobTFPL, now called X, of course, not Twitter, but I really like these stats. I've showed them in previous videos, but they show the likelihood of defenders to get goal involvements basically during the season, and it projects how many they're going to get. And the reason I like the spread betting markets is because I say it in every video, but bookmakers spend millions and millions of pounds on maths and algorithms that make their betting odds so they can make as much profit as possible from gamblers, right? That's how it works. So as far as I'm concerned, bookmakers' odds and the numbers behind it are the most accurate projection models you can get because they spend the most money on them, so they have to be, in my mind at least, the most accurate, right? And you can see, I won't go through them all, but these are the top players. Trent is number 1, expected to get 13.9 goal involvements across the season. Got Pedro Porro there as well. Trippier, Robertson, James, Munoz of obviously Crystal Palace, Martson, Leif Davies of Ipswich. He could be a good option, although I would question exactly how many clean sheets Ipswich will actually keep. Then you got Guardiola there, 6.8. You can see the rest of the players on the list there. Interestingly, I'd ask the question, I'm a little bit torn at the moment. It's one of the positions I'm torn on. I want to pick a sort of more expensive or premium defender, and I'm torn really between Trent, Guardiola and an Arsenal defender. And the question I'm asking myself is how many more attacking returns could someone like Trent or Guardiola get than the Arsenal defenders compared to how many more clean sheets the Arsenal defenders can get from Trent and Guardiola? Does that make sense? So basically, I think the Arsenal defenders will get less attacking returns than Trent and Guardiola, but based on their, defensive numbers from seasons gone by, last 2 seasons they kept the most clean sheets and conceded the fewest goals in the league, right? So yeah, I mean, that's the question I'm asking myself at the moment. Right now, in my defense, I'm going for Guardiola. Other 2 defenders at the moment for me, I'm torn on another one as well, I must say. I know I said this is my final team selection, but there are still a couple of players I'm a little bit unsure of. Dean Henderson's my goalkeeper. Spoke about that already. I'm pretty secure with that decision. I still think if Gahey leaves for Newcastle, I still think Henderson is the best 4.5 million keeper. When you look down, you've got the Nottingham Forest guys. Sells could start, but then they've got another goalkeeper waiting in the wings who could potentially play. I think Henderson's pretty much nailed on to start for Crystal Palace. Looks like Sam Johnson is getting, either leaving the club or being sold. So I do think Henderson's place in the team is pretty solid. And with Gahey in the team or not last season, Palace looked pretty good defensively. So I'm still happy to have Henderson. Guardiola is my choice at the moment. I think when you look at Trent, Guardiola and the Arsenal defenders, I think Guardiola offers a balance between being a little bit cheaper than Trent, probably offering a little bit more in the way of attacking returns than the Arsenal defence, and probably a halfway house in terms of total clean sheets. I think Trent will keep the fewest clean sheets of the 3, if that makes sense. Guardiola somewhere in the middle, and Arsenal likely keep the most. So I think the best of both worlds is really Guardiola. Mykolenko is an interesting one. I saw on Planet FPL, by the way, if you've not checked out Planet FPL before, please do. What James does on there is has a correspondent for each 20 teams in the Premier League, and there's a feature special basically with each of the correspondents. He called it the Clash of the Correspondents Week, I believe, where he gets each of the 20 correspondents on a podcast for an hour or so, and the correspondent, talks about the players in their squad. And the Everton correspondent commented, and thank you, there was a comment on my YouTube. I think it was FPL Tony that left the comment. He was saying that the guy talking about Everton didn't really like Mykolenko. He said he probably plays the first 3 or 4 games, but doesn't have the best injury record, and he expects Everton to concede a fair few goals. So I was confident in Mykolenko, but after watching that video, I'm a little bit less confident. Lewis Hall, though, I really do like. There is, again, a little bit of doubt around him. I don't think there are any players in my team, apart from absolute obvious ones, that there isn't a little bit of doubt around. But Lewis Hall, I think he should be starting at left back for Newcastle. He's had a really wonderful pre-season for them. Looked really attacking in the games that he's played. One thing to say, if they sign Gahey, the back 4 could potentially, have 3 players sort of 6 foot or under. Not necessarily the tallest back 4 in the league, and that might leave them a bit open from set pieces, and it could mean that Dan Burn plays at left back. That's sort of a hole that I've identified in that Newcastle defence, but I just think with how well Lewis Hall has been playing during pre-season and beyond, I do think he's probably the best at this price point. Genuinely think he's the best 4.5 million defender if he plays. One potential change I could make to this team, based on what I said about Mykolenko, I'm starting to warm to Quansah from Liverpool. I think he's going to play. Konate, he looks like he's made of cheese, to be honest. Matip doesn't seem to be around anymore, really. I think Quansah is going to be Van Dijk's, the first choice partner for Van Dijk, and Konate will come in whenever he's fit, maybe for the Champions League, something like that. But the Liverpool opening couple of fixtures, Ipswich and Brentford, I suggest they could keep clean sheets in those games. No, I don't think Liverpool are by any means the best defence in the league, but they got 2 nice fixtures, and you can have a starting Liverpool defender for 4.5 million, which I think is really good value. So at the moment, that's my goalkeeper and 3 starting defenders. All right, so I mentioned Lewis Hall and Mykolenko there, right? But there are so many 4.5 million defenders that you can pick from. I'm not going to go through each of them, but I wanted to put a pretty conclusive list, I think, of all the picks that are available. Obviously, things change with Gahey and his fixtures change. I think, yeah, Dan Burn's on there. So imagine Dan Burn's fixtures on Gahey if the Newcastle move comes off. I do actually think I might go for Gahey over Lewis Hall if he does sign, just because he's just that little, I think he'll be that little bit more nailed than Hall is. I think Gahey's going to play every game that he's fit for Newcastle pretty much. Whereas Lewis Hall could be rotated with someone like Dan Burn if they're a little bit worried about free kicks or set pieces. That would be my view. I'm not going to go through all of these guys. There's so many players to pick from. But I would say, looking at 4.5 million defenders, these guys here are the ones I would consider picking, other than Quansah, Mykolenko and Hall, who are in my team at the moment. All right, so before I get into the midfield and forwards, again, I just wanted to look at the Rob T FPL projected goal involvement odds. Now, this is total projected goal involvements across the season, according again to those bookmakers' odds and algorithms and maths, etc. So millions and millions of pounds are invested in putting these numbers together to hopefully, well, from a gambling company's perspective anyway, make them as much money as possible. So from my mind, it's the best projected metric you can find for use in fantasy football. And you can see the top players, well, the top 5, I'll read them. Haaland, Salah, Saka, Palmer, Son. Not entirely surprising, right? They're probably the 5 best players, or most likely players to get attacking returns in the Premier League, right? But going down the list, you know, you're probably going to want to be picking a good number of those guys depending on who you can afford. But I'd say where this list is really useful is looking at the other picks. So potentially the cheaper players, you know, if you've got a debate between, I don't know, João Pedro or Anthony, you know, someone like at that price point where you're deciding between a couple of players, looking at a metric like this can really help you in my mind. All right, so my midfield as it stands then, I'm going to go for Mo Salah, and I think he's going to be my captain, but I'll do a little captaincy segment in this one because I think it's important to compare some statistics and data to try and understand who is the best captain. Anthony Gordon, I think he's going to be starting for Newcastle. There is a little bit of a rumour that he could be off to Liverpool. I don't think that's going to come to fruition. I think he's going to be starting for Newcastle. And if he does, that Southampton, Bournemouth, couple of games to start off, even Spurs at home, I think he could do well in. I think there's 3 really good fixtures from an attacking perspective for Newcastle. Yeah, I think Gordon could do really well. Got nearly 30 attacking returns in the Premier League last season. I think 26 or 27 attacking returns. I don't know if anyone's seen the podcast that he did with Gary Neville last season, but I definitely urge you to watch it if you haven't already, because it really shows what kind of mentality he has. And based on that podcast, I just don't see a way in that he has a worse season this year than he did last season, unless, of course, he gets injured. I've gone for Eze. I've seen a few people doubting him as an option. There are Man City links and rumours, and he does have a release clause with Crystal Palace. And obviously, a release clause means as soon as a club meets it, Crystal Palace are kind of forced to sell him. So we'll have to keep an eye on Eze this week, basically, because it does look like Man City are kind of interested in him. I'm still interested in picking him in my team, though, while he's at Crystal Palace. With Elise gone, he's going to just be the absolute talisman in my mind. On penalties, free kicks, I think that gives him plenty of opportunities to score and get assists. And also Brentford and West Ham first couple of games. I think that's a pretty decent couple of fixtures for him to get returns in. And then I've gone for Smith Rowe as a 5.5 million midfielder. And now I'm going to actually show a bit of a list at the moment, because I think there are so many pickable 5 and 5.5 million midfielders in this game that I think it makes sense to just have one of them in your team. And then I believe, give it a month maybe, one will emerge as just the absolute standout. I think the guys I've circled in red here, apart from Smith Rowe, who I haven't circled for some reason, but is in my team, the guys that I've hashed off in red are the other pickable options at this price point. Semenyo at Bournemouth, I think, could do really well, particularly in the absence of Solanke. Hudson-Odoi, I think, will just tickle along all season long. Jacob Murphy of Newcastle has had a really, really good pre-season. And I think based on the pre-season that he's had, I think he's going to start at least the first couple of games. And like I said, with Newcastle, they've got 2 really nice fixtures, so he could be a good option. And definitely, I think, a really nice differential. Justin Kluivert at Bournemouth. He took a penalty for Bournemouth during pre-season. Now, I don't think we can confirm or say with true certainty who is going to be the Bournemouth penalty taker without Solanke. But given he took one in pre-season, I think Kluivert has made a fairly big case for him to be the Bournemouth penalty taker. Minter of Brighton, really good before he joined Brighton, had a really good pre-season. And I think he's played well enough that he's going to be starting for Brighton. I don't think the Brighton fixtures are that good to kick off with, but I don't know. Brighton seem to always do okay against the big teams in my mind. They don't necessarily win the games, but I wouldn't be too worried about them scoring. Maybe that game week 3 fixture against Arsenal was the one that would put me off. And then Morgan Rogers, a lot of people backing him to be playing regularly for Aston Villa. Yeah, he did look really good towards the back end of last season, and I've seen a few people tip him to be the next Cole Palmer. I'm not sure I'll quite agree on that level, but I do think he will be a good option. I mean, I've circled or squared off those guys, but there are definitely other pickable players on this list. So maybe let me know in the comments if you've got a favourite 5 or 5.5 million midfielder. I think I've settled on a front 3 now. Haaland is in my team. I don't necessarily think, well, I'm not going to captain him in game week 1. I'm going to give that away straight away. But game week 2, when he's got Ipswich at home, I think he's by far and away the best captain. I mean, Fantasy Football Hub are literally predicting him to score a goal and get another kind of return. 8.5 points he's expected to score in game week 2. I think you'd be going into game week 2 a little bit worried if you didn't own Haaland. So yeah, for that reason I've gone for him. And especially with this 5 transfer rule that FPL have brought in, I really want to get off to a good solid start, which for me means owning the best captain for each game week. And looking at the way the expected points are playing out in Fantasy Football Hub at least, Haaland is the best captain for game week 2 and 3, with Salah, I think, being the best captain for game week 1. So yeah, own Salah for game week 1 and put the armband on him, but I'd also own Haaland as well. You don't necessarily have to captain him. I know he's 15 million and you're not captaining him, but I would plan to in game weeks 2 and 3. Outside of that, I think Isak, I don't really need to say much about him. I think he should just be almost as essential as it gets. Not that any player is really essential, but I'd say he's as essential as it gets for FPL assets this season. Had a great year for Newcastle last time out as their penalty taker. If he stays fit all the way through the season, which I'm a little bit doubtful of, I guess, I think he can score 25 to 30 goals. Genuinely do. And then I went for Solanke of Spurs as well. I really like him as an option. Yes, he might not be the penalty taker for Spurs. I probably don't think he will, actually. He's got to displace Son as the penalty taker, the talisman of that team and club captain now. Maybe if Son misses 1 or 2 penalties this season, it might change over to Solanke. But I just think he's going to get so many chances playing as a centre forward in that Spurs team. The way Ange likes to play his football, I think Solanke is almost the perfect striker for him to bring in, because he's got such a good all-round game that I think will really help. I'm not saying he's similar to Harry Kane or anything, but I think he can bring other players into the game, hold the ball up and also get in the box and finish himself. And yeah, Leicester, Everton and Newcastle away as the first 3. I know I've got Lewis Hall in my team, but I don't think Newcastle are all that solid defensively. I don't think Everton I said with Mykolenko, I do doubt a little bit their defensive ability. And Leicester first up, I think Leicester are really poor defensively. So 3 decent fixtures for Solanke to open up. And yeah, I think he makes my team. One other betting odds projection, etc. that I thought I'd mention, I did it in my last video as well, but Rob T FPL has taken some bookies odds for players to be the top point scorer in FPL this season, and then he's, I believe, done some maths to turn that into a points projection. So this is basically bookies odds turned into FPL points projections. So you can see, according to the bookies, who they think is going to be the top scoring set of players in FPL. I'm not going to go through all of them, but yeah, I mean, you can see them on this list for yourself. So maybe if you're still unsure about who to pick in your team, looking at a metric like this might also help you. All right, so the final thing to decide on then is captaincy. Now, I've used a few expected points metrics in order to get down to the nitty gritty and work out who I'm going to captain. First up, from my friends at Drafthound, they've got Salah as number 1, Haaland number 2, Son number 3, Odegaard, Palmer, Foden, Saka. Next up, FPL Review. They interestingly have Saka as the number 1 player for game week 1. 6.8 expected points, Isak in 2nd, Salah in 3rd, Haaland in 4th, Odegaard in 5th. And then Fantasy Football Hub have Salah at number 1. Fantasy Football Hub have Salah at number 1. 7.6 expected points for Salah. 7.2 for Haaland, Saka and Isak in 3rd and 4th. So if you're looking at that, it suggests to me that you should captain Mo Salah. He's the top player for expected points by a couple of sources now. And as you can see there, for Fantasy Football Hub, he is, because those are the expected points I'm using on my team selection. If you put this team into the Fantasy Football Hub AI tool with Quansah in instead of Mykolenko, you get a 93% AI rating and 65 expected points. I just wanted to say on Fantasy Football Hub, by the way, I've had an offer in my description the whole of preseason, basically, and it's coming to the end of your chance to get the most of the offer, basically. And if you sign up to it before the end of the season, my link gets you 50% off, and you get full access to all the tools, the AI team rating, AI suggested transfers, expected points data for the entire season, a week-on-week team planning tool. There's just so much there on Fantasy Football Hub for you to use. I get you 50% off, and also they're running an offer at the moment where if you don't win your mini league this season, you get your money back. So that's what my link gets you. So if you're interested, please check out the link in the description below. But yeah, this is my team. I think I'm getting there now. Like I said, maybe a bit unsure on Guardiola, maybe on Hall as well. We'll see how confident I am going into that final day on those guys, but I think I'm nearly there now. I've lost in Nkunku, who I did have in previous drafts. I do think he's a good option, but with the signing of Pedro Neto, they've got Nicholas Jackson there, Raheem, they've got so many options in those forward positions that I would just question quite how many minutes he gets. Whereas Salah, Gordon, Eze and Smith Rowe, gotta think they're nailed on and will probably play 90 minutes most games that they're fit for. Same kind of for Solanke, really. So yeah, that's my team. Let me know what you think of it in the comments. All right, and that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave me a like rating. The lighting and setup here might be a bit different than you're used to. I'm actually on holiday in Rome at the moment. I've taken all my recording equipment, laptop, and a little light with me. You can see it waving around there to do all my recording while I'm away, because it's the week before the FPL season begins, so I can't miss the opportunity to get some content out and keep you guys going while I'm away. So yeah, took my stuff on holiday, so I hope you appreciate that. Yeah, if you did, please subscribe to the Go on a Goal channel. It should be just there on your screen if you want to see more content from me. Like I said, I'll make a few more videos before the start of the season. Unfortunately, though, I'll be flying home on Friday evening when the FPL deadline is. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to go live for a Game Week 1 deadline stream, but I'll be doing all I can to make, like I said, 2 or 3 more videos before the deadline itself comes in. And I will probably do an absolute final nailed on team selection as well, so you guys can see what my team looks like going into the season. All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in my next video.